Let me just sort myself out here and we'll get started. So thank you for your patience, everyone. I appreciate that. Sorry for the little glitches we had there, but this is why we do a test to make sure that everything's going to work before we get started. Welcome to this year's Climate Action Week. This is, as you know, maybe, this is something that we do every year, and it's timed with the Scottish Government's Climate Action Week so that everyone in Scotland is hopefully either learning about or taking action on climate change all together in this whole week. I'm just going to turn your sound off, Emma, just because your microphone rubbing is just making a bit of a noise. Get my window back, that would help. There we go. So what are we going to do this week? Well, like the previous 2 years, and if you haven't seen the previous 2 years worth of lessons, they're all recorded and they're on our website if you'd like to have a look later on after this week maybe, or maybe in the afternoon. So this week, we're going to learn all about, today, we're going to learn all about the power of our voices and community with some inspiring examples of young activists just like you that are already shaping change. Right. And Tuesday, we're going to look at nature's own engineers. Wednesday, we're going to find out what net zero means and how we can make it happen, because Scotland is moving toward becoming a net zero nation with restored biodiversity by 2045. And that's coming up pretty soon. So we'll need to know what it is and how we can all help. And on Thursday, we're going to look at how we can all be more connected to nature and natural processes to create a more sustainable future. And Friday, as we always do, we're going to have an assembly sharing your work, and we might have a special guest to share with you as well. So that's very exciting. But first, so we've got Emma here to talk to us today, but first we're going to have a wee quiz. Now, don't worry, this is just to show how much you already know about climate change, because I bet you know more than you think. Okay, so let's go with a couple questions to see how much you already know. The first one is a true or false question. So true or false, climate is the same thing as weather. They're the same. So if you think that's true, put your hand up. And if you think that's false, put your hand on your head. Teachers, if you like, you can put in the chat what your class thinks. I'm going to put the chat up so I can see. What do you think? Got a couple schools saying they think that's false. Mrs. Clark's class thinks half and half. Hands on head, unanimous. Very good, mostly false. All right, so I'll tell you the answer. You can see if you're right. It is false. So weather is the state of the atmosphere in a particular place and time. So what it's doing where you live. So maybe that's heat, cloudiness, dryness, sunshine, or if you're in Stirling today, wind and rain. But climate is the long-term weather pattern of a whole region. So what the weather and the climate has been like over a long time and a larger place, not just Stirling, the whole of Scotland, for example. And typically that's averaged over 30 years. So it's a much bigger concept. Right, let's try the next question. What is climate change? Climate change, if you think it's how many greenhouse gases are emitted over time, 2 hands up, and you can do a little dance. If you think it's longer term shifts in temperature and weather patterns, 1 hand up. And if you think that climate change is changes in how much ice is melting at the North and South poles, hand on your head. I'll give you a moment to think about that one. If you want to put your answers in the chat, that's also very cool. We'll see what you think. Don't worry about getting these right or wrong, because we're going to learn so much this week. You've got most people have one hand up so far. Oh, but Mr. Redmond's class has hands on head. Now let's see shall we see what the right answer is then? Most people have one hand up. Well done, because that is correct. Now this one's a bit tricky though, because the first option, how many greenhouse gases are emitted over time, is one of the things that can cause climate change. And the last option, changes in how much ice is melting at the North and South poles, is a consequence of climate change, is what happens when we have climate change. The ice is starting to change how much ice there is at the North and South poles, and that's mostly melting, unfortunately. Right. One more, I think. True or false, climate change is a natural process. If you think it's natural, put one hand up. And if you think it's false, it's not natural, put your hand on your head. Let's see what you think about this one. A lot of people saying they think it's false so far. Ms. Mack's class has a mix of answers. Most people in the chat are saying false, except for Ms. Mackenzie's class that says mostly true, and Ms. Martin's class. Let's see what the right answer is. Drum roll, please. The answer is true. Now you might be going, what? Because most of what we're talking about when we're talking about taking climate action is taking action on man-made climate change. But did you know that the climate does change naturally over really long periods of time? But by releasing so many greenhouse gases, humans, us, we're causing our climate to change much faster than it would happen naturally. So climate change in itself happens naturally, but we are making it happen faster, which is the issue. So what would we like you to do this week? And then we'll move on to our special guest. As part of our live lesson this week, we'd like to invite you to create a poster in groups or as a class that will be a message to our First Minister of the future that you hope for when we reach net zero and restored nature by 2045 as a country. So what do you think your school or community would look like? What are your hopes for 2045? And there is a resource in the resource folder all about how to do this for your teachers. The second thing we'd like you to do, as always, let's get outside while it's still warm enough and do a litter pick, right? Because cleaning up the environment and helping wildlife is a key part of climate change. And the third thing we're going to ask you to do this week is, if you can, please send us a short video message as a class or individually of how your school, nursery or class are taking climate action. And you're going to start your video with, I keep Scotland beautiful by, and then tell us all about your actions on climate change. And lastly, you can celebrate all the great things you do for the planet by having a One Planet picnic. And that's a picnic that's good for you and good for the environment too. And now I'm so excited to introduce Emma Reynolds, who is going to show us her new book. She's going to talk about how the young people in the world are making change happen and how change and building a better future starts with us. I have to say, Emma, I have a copy of your book and it is beautiful and I am really enjoying reading it. So I'm really excited about what you have to tell us today. So I am going to stop sharing these and I'm going to let you tell us all about Young Activists.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me. It's doing it. Yeah, it's doing it the proper way. That's what we like. Okay, cool. So can everyone see that? give me I can't see the chat, so you have to give me a verbal
That's great.
yes.
That's worked.
Awesome.
Yay!
Hooray, thank you. It takes a while to warm up. So yeah, hello everybody. My name is Emma Reynolds. I'm an author and illustrator from Manchester, and I'm beaming in today on the internet to say hello to you all and tell you all about how your voice is powerful and about my book. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an intro. I'm going to tell you more about the youth climate activists. I'm going to tell you where do you start, because it can feel quite overwhelming, and explain how good things are happening. So I'm going to start with telling you how powerful your voice is. So if one person was to share one thing, so one of the most important things is climate education. So say you were to tell 3 people something about the climate and the nature crisis, and then those 3 people were to tell another 3 people, and then those people were to tell another 3 people each, how long do you think it would take to reach every person on Earth? So you can type it into the chat if you like, and then I can be verbally told what you think. How long would it take to reach everyone on Earth if all these people told 3 people and it kept going to infinity?
I think everyone's still having a think about that one. That's a
Yeah.
good question. Okay, so Ms. Mackenzie's class says 5 to 30,000 years.
I love that.
We've got a few weeks.
30,000 years, imagine.
20 years, a year, question mark? 7 years,
Okay, yeah.
3 years, 10 years.
Awesome.
A lot saying a
Fantastic
year.
answers. And yes, I also thought it would be years and years and years, but it's actually only 3 weeks. So that is how powerful spreading a message can be. So thank you very much, everybody. So this is my first book I did, which is called Amara and the Bats. It's all about bat conservation, community action, and hope. And I made it so that bats, we could tell everyone how vital and important bats are to our environment. And this is my latest book, which I've been working on the last 3 years, and it's all about youth climate activists from all around the world, written and illustrated by me and 15 other amazing artists. So each biography, each youth climate activist biography has been illustrated by a different artist. So they've all got different art styles. I'm going to show you more of them in a bit. And these are the amazing artists I had the honor to work with from all around the world on our book. So where did our book begin? So I had the idea for it a long time ago in 2019. So back in 2019, the youth climate activists from Europe were coming over to the UK in a big way, but they weren't seen positively in the press. And this made me really angry, because I thought these young people are doing something amazing, but they aren't being taken seriously. And I had an idea of what I could do within my field as an author and illustrator to support this. So I came up with this campaign called Kidlit for Climate, where authors and illustrators are in solidarity with these young people, the people we make our books for. And I came up with the logo, and I drew an illustrated protester, and I said, come on, fellow illustrators and authors, let's illustrate a protester, and then we'll put them together in one big image for the first world global climate strike. And I thought I'd get maybe 30, but within 2 weeks, I've been sent 1,000 illustrations from so many different places around the world, and it was absolutely incredible show of support. And 6 months in, I'd been sent over 3,000 illustrations from over 50 countries in every continent, even Antarctica. There was a researcher up there who sent us a picture. We also protested in the street as well, along with the youth and adults taking part. And we took part in the biggest protest in history, where over 7.6 million people took part. And we kept doing this over the years. Obviously then COVID hit, so we had to do it online. And then I was back out in 2021 with a mask on. So yeah, that's been about 3 years ago now, or 4 years now. And I've completely lost count of how many, but I would say there's around 10,000 illustrations. And this is what gave me the idea for our new book. But I didn't want to make it just about the adults doing these pictures. I wanted to bring it back to the reason we made this campaign, which was to celebrate the youth climate activists and what they have done. And I met some amazing artists through this campaign, and actually a lot of them ended up being the illustrators in the book. So Margarita ended up illustrating Arshat Makichan, who was in Russia, but because of his protests, he has had his citizenship removed. So he's now in Germany trying to stay safe. So it's not easy for every country to be a protester. Victoria Moderna and Federico Piatti, they illustrated Dara McAnulty's bio, who you might have heard of. So he is an amazing naturalist and autistic advocate. Devon Holsworth illustrated Daphne Frias, who I'm going to tell you more about in a moment. And Erin Hunting illustrated Jean Hinchcliffe's biography in Australia. So, how does our book begin? So Drawn to Change the World starts by explaining the science. So you guys probably already know the main, like we talked about before, the main reason why the Earth is heating too quickly is because of the release of fossil fuels, which is trapping the heat in and heating our world too quickly. But it's also really important to remember that it's also about the destruction of nature. And we humans are part of nature. We are nature. We rely on it completely to survive. It's our food, it's our air, it's our water. So as well as the release of fossil fuels that we need to bring down massively and stop, we also need to be protecting and restoring nature. So who is mainly responsible? This is also a really important thing to remember. So the richest 10%, which is definitely not me or anyone here, unless you're a secret billionaire. So the richest 10% are responsible for 50% of emissions, which is absolutely huge. But the poorest 50% of the world are only responsible for 10%. So the people who are least responsible are also the people who are being affected the most. So people in countries in the global south, which isn't geographically the south, but is lower income countries, they are affected the most, but they release the least, which is super unfair. So the solution is already out there and is quite simple. We need to stop using fossil fuels immediately and protect and restore nature as fast as we can. So Indigenous people, they know this. They have been protecting the world for forever. They are the original people in those places. So they only make up less than 5% of the global population now, but they still protect over 80% of the world's biodiversity. And that's why it was so important for me to start my book with these Indigenous activists, because it didn't start with Greta Thunberg, who's the most famous probably, but Indigenous people, Indigenous youth, Indigenous elders, they have been protecting and fighting for our environment for decades, absolutely since forever. So it's really important that we support them. So Takata Ionai says 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity is in Indigenous lands. And that's because we've not allowed our lands and our sacred homelands to be desecrated or exploited in the name of economic progress. So just really important to remember that we humans are part of nature, we're not separate from it, and Indigenous people need to be at the centre of decision making, and they're not at the moment. So the first bio in the book is Autumn Peltier, and she is a water protector in Canada, and she's really upset when she was little to find that one of the reservations had boil advisories on their toilet door, which means you have to boil all the water before you're even allowed to drink it, and you can't even wash your hands in it because it's been contaminated by these oil pipelines. So oil is a type of fossil fuel, and these companies deliberately choose to build these oil pipelines through Indigenous lands instead of around white areas. And this is really, really bad because these pipelines always leak, and they leak into the water, and that means that water is not safe. So Autumn has dedicated her life to stopping this. She even met the president of Canada and said, "I'm really unhappy with the choices you've made and the broken promises to my people." But still, last year, there were still 29 communities without safe water. So that's what Autumn does. She's a very, very important activist. So Takata Ionai, who's in the US, she is also fighting against pipelines. So again, these companies choose to build it through Indigenous lands, through their water, kind of skirting around the white communities and deliberately choosing to build it through Indigenous people's lands, which again seems really unfair because they're bearing the brunt of these hazards. And both of these things are examples of environmental racism. So I know it's very heavy for a Monday morning, but it's super important that we realize that this is happening. So it's through intentional design. Indigenous, Black, Brown communities, they're all bearing the brunt of these environmental hazards, such as leaking oil pipelines and polluting factories. And this is something we really need to support them with. So Daphne Frias is an incredible activist from the US. She lives in, she's from Harlem, which is in New York, and she has cerebral palsy and uses a wheelchair. And she talks about how disabled people are also bearing more brunt of the climate crisis because, for example, if there's bad air, and they have asthma, that affects their ability to be able to breathe. So she talks about the intersections and how important it is to support people who, in a climate crisis, for example, if there's a flood, they can't leave because they can't charge their wheelchair and things like that. So that's also really important. And sometimes disabled people are often forgotten when it comes to the climate crisis. So Daphne also, there's obviously a lot of gun violence in America, and Daphne talks about how all of these things are related. So she says it's super important to remember that the systems that led us to the climate crisis and to gun violence are the exact same systems, because the same communities that are disproportionately affected by one are disproportionately affected by the other. So all of these oppressive systems are linked. So communities that are already marginalized in society, for example, Indigenous people, like I mentioned, Black people, people of color, disabled people, homeless people, LGBTQIA people, all these people who are already marginalized are the most impacted by the climate and nature crisis. So Leah Namugera lives in Uganda, and she, instead of wanting presents for her birthday, she decided, Dad, for my birthday, I don't need a party or presents. I want to plant trees instead. So she started this campaign called Birthday Trees, and her goal is to plant 1 billion trees. But she says we can only achieve this if we work together. Iqbal Banruddin is in Pakistan, and Pakistan is only responsible for 1% of global emissions, but it's one of the most vulnerable countries to the effects of climate change. So he decided to go around universities and schools and tell everyone about climate education. And this was a long time ago in 2010. And he's been working for years to try and get more people aware of it. And he does litter picking with his friends in the community to make a difference. So Edgar Edmund Torimo in Tanzania, he thought of a really good idea for using up the plastic waste and making it into affordable building materials. So that's a really ingenious way to make the use of a problem and solving another problem at the same time. So people's houses would get eroded by the floods really easily. And so he made these plastic bricks out of recycled bottles so that people had affordable materials. And he ended up employing a lot of local people as well, which gave them jobs. So the last one I'm going to show you is Melati and Isabel Wyson. So they're from Bali, an island in Indonesia, and they campaigned to make single-use plastics illegal. And it took them 6 long years. Their campaign was called Bye Bye Plastic Bags, and they eventually did it. And they made plastic bags illegal in 2019 in Bali, and all single-use plastic, which is a really, really amazing achievement. That's them celebrating. Hooray! And now they started a really great website I encourage you to check out called Youthtopia. And it's a change-making platform. So you can learn how to be a young change maker. They've got tons of videos and advice about what you can do in your area, which is absolutely fantastic. So Melati says we've become literally a living example that kids can do things. It doesn't matter how old you are, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world. Just find that one thing that you are passionate about and go for it. So I'm talking for a little while, so we're going to go for a little slower pace now. So where to start? So the best place to start is choosing something you're personally passionate about. So it has to be something you're really interested in, because it has to be something that's sustainable, which means something that you can do for a long period of time, rather than just a short burst of energy and then you go, oh, I'm really tired now, I can't do this anymore. So it's got to be something you can do for a long time that you're going to enjoy. So a really great exercise that you can do after I've finished is the Climate Then exercise, which is thought up by Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who's an amazing biologist. So the first circle is what brings you joy. The next circle is what are you good at? And the next one is what work needs doing. And in the middle will be your unique climate action. So I did an example of what mine is so that it gives you an idea. So mine is, what brings me joy personally is art, books, and telling stories. What am I good at? Art, communicating tough topics and bringing people together. The work that needs doing is education and what we can do in our communities. And so my climate action, I've decided to dedicate my life to making books about bats who are misunderstood, nature, and climate. Okay, so another example could be, oh, what brings you joy? Sports. What are you really good at? Football. What work needs doing? People need education about why plastic grass is toxic and leads to flooding because it doesn't have the soil, etc., etc. And your action could be doing a sponsored run or a sponsored football game, and at the end you tell everyone about plastic grass and hand out leaflets, etc. So it's like an awareness campaign. So there's literally a role for absolutely everybody, and we're going to talk more about that in a bit. So just showing you some of the tangible things that came from my book Amara and the Bats. So I go into schools and I tell kids about how amazing bats are. Some kids go, oh, I'm a bit scared of bats, but by the end of it, they love them and they really want to help them. And bat boxes are like a man-made roost that you can put up in a tree so that bats have somewhere to live when they don't have any trees that are suitable. So people have put up their own bat box. People have baked cakes to raise money for them, just like in the book. And that makes me so, so happy to see it actually happening in real life. So this is, you can download a template and you can have a go at this. So if you're struggling to think, oh, I don't really know what I'm personally passionate about, I just want to help, here are some ideas. So it could be a local issue that affects you. For example, around you, there could be really bad air pollution, people could be using lots of pesticides, or you might have a lack of water access. So a global issue that you might care about is plastic waste, intensive farming, environmental racism like we talked about before, and the global south being worse affected. Or you could do something like your favorite animal. Are they endangered? Is their habitat threatened? And you could focus on that, kind of like I did with the bats. So the most important thing is to work in community. We can't do this alone. You'll burn out. It's too much for one person, so you must work together. That's the most important thing to remember. And absolutely everyone is needed. So this is a handy poster you can download. I'll send the link after, but it's also here. So there's a role for absolutely everyone. It's not just about the people holding the mic and being a loud activist. There's space for everybody in every role and every skill. So we need people to make tea. We need people to give food to nourish everyone. You might be really good at maths and making spreadsheets or being organized. We need first aiders, etc., etc. Like everyone is needed. So no matter what you're good at or what you enjoy, there's a space for you. And I just want to end on, I'm just checking the time, good things are happening. So you might think, oh, there's so much bad news. It just feels like, what's the point? It feels like it's nearly over. Like I can't, it's too much. And I completely understand where you're coming from. But there's something very important to know. Bad news sells. Did you know that bad news sells more newspapers and gets more clicks? So this is by design. This means they make more money from adverts in the paper and online. So if you think there's only bad news, this is why, because people are more likely to pick up a newspaper or click on something online if it's shocking. So this leads to something called doomism, which also makes people feel hopeless and want to give up. And if we fall into doomism and thinking, oh, there's nothing I can do, what's the point? This just allows these harmful systems like capitalism, environmental racism, etc., which is run by the same powerful billionaires causing the crisis. It just allows it to carry on as it is. But we need to change that. So people who are hopeless don't rise up to challenge these systems. So we have to have radical hope, because good things are happening. It's just not reported as much. So you have to seek it out. And we have to reject doomism and rise as communities. That is powerful, because progress is being made all over the world. I'm going to show you some places where you can find that good news. So this illustrator, Mario Gatti, was getting so fed up with hearing all the bad news, he created the Happy Broadcast. And it is a Instagram, it's a website, it's an app and a podcast. And it collects all of the good things happening in the world and illustrates them in a really accessible way. And it just makes me happy because it shows the good things are happening, which is so underreported in the main news. So here's some examples. This is a huge win. Some of the world's biggest mining companies have withdrawn requests to research and extract minerals on indigenous land in Brazil's Amazon rainforest. So since they got a new president, they've also managed to halve deforestation, which is absolutely incredible. So in Holland, they're covering hundreds of bus stops with plants, which is really, really good for the bees. And this is one from literally 2 days ago, I think. 16 young activists in Montana won a landmark climate change lawsuit. For the first time, a US court has declared that a government has a constitutional duty to protect people from climate change. And that sounds really complicated, but it basically means things are moving in the right direction, because governments aren't protecting young people from climate change. They're ignoring it, they're delaying it. And this sort of thing, where it actually goes into the courts and they call them out on it, is a really big deal. So 92 million tons of clothes are discarded each year in the world. To help fight waste, France has launched a scheme that will allow people to claim back some of the costs of mending clothes and shoes. And it just goes on and on and on. If you go on the website, you can look through all of the archives of all of these good news, and it's really awesome. So like I said at the beginning, your voice is powerful. Remember, every time you tell 3 people and they tell 3 people, you're spreading this knowledge and all of these good things. Jamie Margolin, who is an activist in the book, says, art has an ability to rapidly and universally communicate messages. Work in community, whether that be with an organization, a community group or coalition, or even just a group of people in your circles who want to take action and come together to do it. So the other brief I would have set you is exactly what your poster brief is, which is awesome, which is imagining a better future. So this is even in the back of the book. Let's imagine a better future together and manifest it into reality. Share your drawings with us. Okay, so you can do the poster, and if you like, you can also use the hashtag and share it with me as well. I'd love to see them. And Mary Anais Hegler says, we've got loads of ideas for solar panels and microgrids. While we have all these pieces, we need a picture of how they come together, and we really need more artists to imagine this future. And I'm just going to end with this quote. It is the goal of oppressive systems to make us feel hopeless, to take away our joy and steal our imagination. Imagination is such a powerful tool. It's not childish or irrelevant. It is actually one of our greatest solutions to imagining a more sustainable, equitable future. So a fairer future. Thank you so much for listening. And I've been told you can send your questions to me and I will reply by email. We have about 6 minutes if you did want to ask me any more questions now. I'm happy to answer them if we have time. I'll pass it back to our presenter, and thank you so much, everybody.
Emma, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I love all the inspiring stories in your book. Like I said, you can't see, there you go. I've been working my way through it. It is a beautiful book with all the illustrations. Yeah, I got it for myself, not for like promoting it. I was like, I have to read this book. It's amazing. I really like how you've said that the arts can be just as powerful in terms of green careers, because that's something that I think that we forget a lot of the time. When we think of green careers, we always think of STEM, and of course that's that because that's what's the innovation, and that's what's we're hoping is going to produce some new technology that will help us to live more sustainably. But I think we forget that there's so many other roles that are desperately needed in terms of, working for the environment and taking climate action, and the arts and illustration, even making tea, even, nourishing those people and supporting the people that are on the front lines, taking action and, doing the protesting. That's equally important, especially things like your book and like all the other books that we've been talking about during our previous climate weeks. Spreading that message is really important, and as many, the more formats that we can get that message out in, the better. So yeah, illustrating, art, journalism, all equally important. And even trades. I was speaking to someone else earlier about how, it's possible to work for climate action in the trades, because that's, even every small change helps, and making every industry sustainable is what's going to get us there. So I think it's very important to talk about the work that you're doing and all the activists that you're talking about, but equally talk about the arts as well. Does anyone have a quick question that you might want to ask? I know I have about a billion, but if you can't think of your question just now, or you're rushing on to something else like break time, snack time, or another lesson, please feel free to email your question to us, because we can share those with Emma. And we can also we can share the answer in our assembly on Friday, which, Emma, you're welcome to join us for, but I understand you might also have other things to do. But yes, we'll answer all of your questions on the Friday, and that goes for all of our lessons this week. So here we go. Here is where you send the questions to if you have any questions at all, either about Emma's work or some of the young activists she's been telling us about, how you can take action yourself. I loved the Venn diagram exercise. That's amazing. And I think that is something that we should do in KSB for our staff. I think we should have a bit of encouragement and look at our special skills and what we're doing to take action, how our interests fit our work, because some of our jobs are also things that you might not think about when you think of green careers. And if you're doing your posters or any of the other things that that we've told you about throughout the whole lesson, your videos, your posters, all of the interesting exercises that Emma had in her presentation with the Venn diagrams and all the posters that she was showing you, please, if you'd like to share them with us, you can find us on all social media platforms at KSB Scotland, or you can always email us at the usual email address. That's ecoschools@keepscotlandbeautiful.org. And we're looking forward to seeing all of your amazing work, even if you just want to say hello. And we'll showcase that on Friday's assembly, together with the answers to any questions that you might send us. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Emma, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. I really appreciate your presentation, and I hope that we can work again together soon. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, teachers. Thank you, pupils. Hope to see you throughout the week. If you missed any of this week's lessons, please don't worry, they'll be recorded and they'll be on our website for you when you have time to get back to them. I hope you have a great rest of your Monday, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. Bye for now.